sight of yet another cloudy day eventually woke me. I lay with my arm across my eyes, groggy and dazed. I moaned and rolled on my side, hoping more sleep would come. And then the previous day flooded back into my awareness. Oh! I sat up so fast it made my head spin. Your hair looks like a haystack, but I like it. His ruffled voice came from the rocking chair in the corner. Edward, you stayed, I rejoiced, and thoughtlessly threw myself across the room and into his lap. I stared up at him, afraid that I had crossed the wrong line, but he laughed. Of course, he answered, startled, but seeming pleased by my reaction. His hands rubbed my back. I laid my head cautiously against his shoulder, breathing in the smell of his skin. I was sure it was a dream. You're not that creative, he scoffed. Yes, sassy Edward is back. Okay. Charlie, I remember, thoughtlessly jumping up again and heading to the door. He left an hour ago, after reattaching your battery cable. He held his arms open for me to return, a nearly irresistible invitation. I need another human minute, I admitted. I'll wait. It seemed like a miracle that he was there, his arms still waiting for me. Wait, he was just sitting there like a creepy mannequin with his arms out that whole time? He reached out to me and my heart thumped unsteadily. Welcome back, he murmured, taking me into his arms. He rocked me for a while in silence, until I noticed that his clothes were changed, his hair smooth. You left? I accused, touching the collar of his fresh shirt. I could hardly leave in the clothes I came in. What would the neighbors think? I hid my face against his shoulder. I love you, I whispered. Oh my gosh, guys, this has been like a day.
So fast.
Oh my gosh. You are my life now, he answered simply. He threw me over his stone shoulder, gently, but with a swiftness that left me breathless. I protested as he carried me easily down the stairs, but he ignored me. He sat me right side up on a chair.
Wait, was he gonna set her upside down or something on a chair? Like, of course he sits right side up.
What's on the agenda for today? I asked. I watched him frame his answer carefully. What would you say to meeting my family? I gulped. Don't worry, he smirked. I'll protect you. I'm not afraid of them, I explained. I'm afraid they won't, like me. It was hard to decide what to wear. I doubted there were any etiquette books detailing how to dress when your vampire sweetheart takes you home to meet his vampire family. I ended up in my only skirt, long, khaki-colored, still casual. That sounds hideous. I put on the dark blue blouse he'd once complimented. A quick glance in the mirror told me my hair was entirely impossible, so I pulled it back into a ponytail. You were utterly indecent. No one should look so tempting. It's not fair.
How long is this chapter anymore?
I don't know what I had expected, but it definitely wasn't this. The house was timeless, graceful, and probably 100 years old. The inside was even more surprising, less predictable than the exterior. It was very bright, very open, and very large. Waiting to greet us, standing just to the left of the door on a raised portion of the floor by a spectacular grand piano, were Edward's parents. They were both dressed casually in light colors that matched the inside of the house. They smiled in welcome, but made no move to approach us, trying not to frighten me, I guessed. Carlisle, Esme, Edward's voice broke the short silence. This is Bella. You're very welcome, Bella. Carlisle's step was measured, careful, as he approached me. He raised his hand tentatively, and I stepped forward to shake hands with him. It's nice to see you again, Dr. Cullen. Please, call me Carlisle. I could feel Edward's relief at my side. Esme smiled and stepped forward as well, reaching for my hand. Her cold stone grasp was just as I expected. It's very nice to know you, she said sincerely. Thank you. I'm glad to meet you too. Where are Alice and Jasper? Edward asked, but no one answered, as they had just appeared at the top of the wide staircase. Hey, Edward, Alice called enthusiastically. She ran down the stairs, a streak of black hair and white skin, coming to a sudden and graceful stop in front of me. Hey, Bella, Alice said, as she bounced forward to kiss my cheek. You do smell nice. I never noticed before, she commented to my extreme embarrassment. Hello, Bella, Jasper said. He kept his distance, not offering to shake my hand, but it was impossible to feel awkward near him. Hello, Jasper, I smiled at him shyly, and then at the others. It's nice to meet you all. You have a really beautiful home, I added conversationally. Thank you, Esme said. My eyes wandered again to the beautiful instrument on the platform by the door. Esme noticed my preoccupation. Do you play? She asked, inclining her head toward the piano. I shook my head. Not at all. But it's so beautiful. Is it yours? No, she laughed. Edward didn't tell you he was musical? No. I glared at his suddenly innocent expression with narrowed eyes. Well, play for her, Esme encouraged. He pulled me along, sitting me on the bench beside him. He gave me a long, exasperated look before he turned to the keys. Then his fingers flowed swiftly across the ivory, and the room was filled with a composition so complex, so luxuriant, it was impossible to believe only one set of hands played. Do you like it? You wrote this? I gasped, understanding. He nodded. It's Esme's favorite. I closed my eyes, shaking my head. The music slowed, transforming into something softer, and to my surprise, I detected the melody of his lullaby weaving through the profusion of notes. "You inspired this one," he said softly. The music grew unbearably sweet. I couldn't speak. "They like you, you know," he said conversationally. "Esme especially." They like me, but Rosalie and Emmett? I trailed off, not sure how to express my doubts. He frowned. "Don't worry about Rosalie," he said, his eyes wide and persuasive. "She'll come around." "Emmett?" "Well, he thinks I'm a lunatic, it's true, but he doesn't have a problem with you. He's trying to reason with Rosalie." "So what was Carlisle telling you before?" His eyebrows pulled together. "You noticed that, did you?" I shrugged. "Of course." "He wanted to tell me some news. He didn't know if it was something I would share with you." "Will you?" "I have to, because I'm going to be a little overbearingly protective over the next few days. Or weeks. And I wouldn't want you to think I'm naturally a tyrant." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, exactly. Alice just sees some visitors coming soon. They know we're here, and they're curious." "Visitors?" "Yes. Well, they aren't like us, of course. In their hunting habits, I mean. They probably won't come into town at all, but I'm certainly not going to let you out of my sight till they're gone." I shivered. Finally, a rational response, looking away, my eyes wandering again around the spacious room. He followed my gaze. "Not what you expected, is it?" he asked, his voice smug. "No," I admitted. "It's so light, so open." He was more serious when he answered. "It's the one place we never have to hide." The song he was still playing, my song, drifted to an end, the final chorus shifting to a more melancholy key. "Thank you," I murmured. I realized there were tears in my eyes. I dabbed at them, embarrassed. Whatever. He touched the corner of my eye, trapping what I missed. He lifted his I remember this part. He lifted his finger, examining the drop of moisture broodingly. Then, so quickly, I couldn't be positive that he really did. He put his finger to his mouth and to taste it.
That's it.
I looked at him questioningly, and he gazed back for a long moment before he finally smiled. "Do you want to see the rest of the house? They're not even discussing that."
I feel like Edward would be an emo vampire that lives up for human tears instead of blood.
We walked up the massive staircase, my hand trailing along the satin-smooth rail. Rosalie and Emmett's room, Carlisle's office, Alice's room. He gestured as he led me past the doors. He would have continued, but I stopped dead at the end of the hall, staring incredulously at the ornament hanging on the wall above my head. Edward chuckled at my bewildered expression. "You can laugh," he said. "It is sort of ironic." I didn't laugh. My hand raised automatically, one finger extended as if to touch the large wooden cross. "It must be very old, I guess." He shrugged. Early 1630s, more or less." I looked away from the cross to stare at him. "Why do you keep this here?" I wondered. "Nostalgia. It belonged to Carlisle's father. It hung on the wall above the pulpit in the vicarage where he preached." I quickly did the mental math. The cross was over 370 years old. The silence stretched on as I struggled to wrap my mind around the concept of so many years. "How old is Carlisle?" I asked quietly. "He just celebrated his 362nd birthday," Edward said. I looked back at him, a million questions in my eyes. He watched me carefully as he spoke. "Carlisle was born in London in the 1640s, he believes. It was just before Cromwell's rule, though." I kept my face composed, aware of his scrutiny as I listened. He was the only son of an Anglican pastor. His mother died giving birth to him. His father was an intolerant man. As Protestants came into power, he was enthusiastic in his persecution of Roman Catholics and other religions. He also believed very strongly in the reality of evil. He led hunts for witches, werewolves, and vampires. I grew very still at the word. They burned a lot of innocent people. Of course, the real creatures that he sought were not so easy to catch. When the pastor grew old, he placed his obedient son in charge of the raids. At first, Carlisle was a disappointment. He was not quick to accuse, to see demons where they did not exist. But he was persistent and more clever than his father. He actually discovered a coven of true vampires that lived hidden in the sewers of the city. In those days, when monsters were not just myths and legends, that was the only way many lived. The people gathered their pitchforks and torches, of course. His brief laugh was darker now. And waited where Carlisle had seen the monsters exit into the street. Eventually, one emerged. He must have been ancient and weak with hunger. Carlisle heard him call out in Latin to the others when he caught the scent of the mob. He ran through the streets, and Carlisle, he was 23 and very fast, was in the lead of the pursuit. The creature could have easily outrun them, but Carlisle thinks he was too hungry, so he turned and attacked. He fell on Carlisle first, but the others were close behind, and he turned to defend himself. He killed 2 men and made off with a third, leaving Carlisle bleeding in the street. He paused. Carlisle knew what his father would do. The bodies would be burned. Anything infected by the monster must be destroyed. Carlisle acted instinctively to save his own life. He crawled away from the alley while the mob followed the fiend and his victim. He hid in a cellar, buried himself in rotting potatoes for 3 days. It's a miracle he was able to keep silent, to stay undiscovered. It was over then, and he realized what he had become. I'm not sure what my face was revealing, but he suddenly broke off. How are you feeling? He asked. I'm fine, I assured him. And though I bit my lip in hesitation, he must have seen the curiosity burning in my eyes. I expect you have a few more questions for me. A few. His smile widened over his brilliant teeth. He started back down the hall, pulling me along by the hand. Come on then, he encouraged. I'll show you. End of chapter. Because Twilight's fine, but it's like the foundation. I'm really excited for the other books because they're bananas.
For the outside world. So excited.
Oh.
Listen. Lady. Like,
today we're on chapter 16, titled Carlisle. He led me back to the room that he'd pointed out as Carlisle's office. Edward opened the door to a high-ceilinged room with tall west-facing windows. Most of the wall space was taken up by towering bookshelves that reached high above my head and held more books than I'd ever seen outside a library. The wall we faced now was different from the others. Instead of bookshelves, this wall was crowded with framed pictures of all sizes, some in vibrant colors, others dull monochromes. I searched for some logic, some binding motif the collection had in common, but I found nothing in my hasty examination. Edward pulled me toward the far left side, standing me in front of a small square oil painting in a plain wooden frame. London in the 1650s, Edward said. I stared at the little picture of Carlisle's hometown for a long moment. What happened then, I finally asked, staring up at Edward, who was watching me. When he knew what he had become, Edward said quietly, he rebelled against it. He tried to destroy himself, but that's not easily done. How? I didn't mean to say it aloud, but the word broke through my shock. He jumped from great heights, Edward told me, his voice impassive. He tried to drown himself in the ocean, but he was young to the new life and very strong. It is amazing that he was able to resist feeding while he was still so new. The instinct is more powerful then. It takes over everything. But he was so repelled by himself that he had the strength to try to kill himself with starvation. Is that possible? My voice was faint. No, there are very few ways we can be killed. So he grew very hungry and eventually weak. He strayed as far as he could from the human populace, recognizing that his willpower was weakening too. For months he wandered by night, seeking the loneliest places, loathing himself. One night, a herd of deer passed his hiding place. He was so wild with thirst that he attacked without a thought. His strength returned, and he realized there was an alternative to being the vile monster he feared. Over the next months, his new philosophy was born. He could exist without being a demon, and he found himself again. He began to make better use of his time. He'd always been intelligent, eager to learn. Now he had unlimited time before him. He studied by night, planned by day. He swam to France, and he swam to France? People swim the channel all the time, Bella, he reminded me patiently. That's true, I guess. It just sounded funny in that context. Go on. Swimming is easy for us. Everything is easy for you, I griped. He chuckled darkly and finished his sentence. Because technically, we don't need to breathe. You don't have to breathe, I demanded. No, it's not necessary. Just a habit, he shrugged. How long can you go without breathing? Indefinitely, I suppose. I don't know. It gets a bit uncomfortable, being without a sense of smell. A bit uncomfortable, I echoed. I wasn't paying attention to my own expression, but something in it made him grow somber. What is it? I whispered, touching his frozen face. I keep waiting for it to happen. For what to happen? I know that at some point, something I tell you or something you see is going to be too much, and then you'll run away from me, screaming as you go. I won't stop you. I want this to happen because I want you to be safe. And yet, I want to be with you. The two desires are impossible to reconcile. He trailed off, staring at my face, waiting. I'm not running anywhere, I promised. We'll see, he said, smiling again. I frowned at him. So, go on. Carlisle was swimming to France. Reflexively, his eyes flickered to another picture, the most colorful of them all, the most ornately framed, and the largest. It was twice as wide as the door it hung next to. That is huge!
That's a very large thing. Also, the angst of these two. Ugh.
The canvas overflowed with bright figures in swirling robes, writhing around long pillars and off marble balconies. I couldn't tell if it represented Greek mythology or if the characters floating in the clouds above were meant to be biblical. Carlyle swam to France and continued on through Europe to the universities there. By night, he studied music, science, medicine, and found his calling in saving human lives. I can't adequately describe the struggle. It took Carlyle 2 centuries of torturous effort to perfect his self-control. Now he is all but immune to the scent of human blood, and he is able to do the work he loves without agony. He finds a great deal of peace there, at the hospital. He tapped his finger against the huge painting in front of us. He was studying in Italy when he discovered the others there. They were much more civilized and educated than the race of the London sewers. He touched a comparatively sedate quartet of figures painted on the highest balcony, looking down calmly on the mayhem below them. I examined the grouping carefully and realized, with a startled laugh, that I recognized the golden-haired man. Solimena was greatly inspired by Carlyle's friends. He often painted them as gods, Edward chuckled. Ero, Marcus, Caius, he said, indicating the other 3, 2 black-haired, 1 snowy white. What happened to them, I wondered aloud, my fingertip hovering a centimeter from the figures on the canvas. They're still there.
Okay.
He shrugged, as they have been for who knows how many millennia. Carlyle stayed with them only for a short time, just a few decades. He greatly admired their civility, their refinement, but they persisted in trying to cure his aversion to his natural food source. They tried to persuade him, and he tried to persuade them, to no avail. At that point, Carlyle decided to try the new world. He dreamed of finding others like himself. He was very lonely, you see. He didn't find anyone for a long time. But as monsters became the stuff of fairy tales, he found he could interact with unsuspecting humans as if he were one of them. He began practicing medicine. When the influenza epidemic hit, thinking of Corona. When the coronavirus hit, he was working nights in a hospital in Chicago. He'd been turning over an idea in his mind for several years, and he had almost decided to act. Since he couldn't find a companion, he would create one. He wasn't absolutely sure how his own transformation had occurred, so he was hesitant. It was in that frame of mind that he found me. There was no hope for me. I was left in a ward with the dying. He had nursed my parents and knew I was alone. He decided to try.
He turned Edward first?
Yeah.
So, for his companion choice, he chose a young lad. An underage boy.
Have you always stayed with Carlyle then, I wondered? Almost always. Almost? He sighed, seeming reluctant to answer. Well, I had a typical bout of rebellious adolescence, about 10 years after I was born, creative, whatever you want to call it. So I went off on my own for a time. We were at the top of the stairs now in another paneled hallway. From the time of my new birth, he murmured, I had the advantage of knowing what everyone around me was thinking, both human and non-human alike. That's why it took me 10 years to defy Carlyle. I could read his perfect sincerity, understand exactly why he lived the way he did. It took me only a few years to return to Carlyle and recommit to his vision. I thought I would be exempt from the depression that accompanies a conscience. Because I knew the thoughts of my prey, I could pass over the innocent and pursue only the evil. If I followed a murderer down a dark alley where he stalked a young girl, if I saved her, then surely I wasn't so terrible. I shivered, imagining only too clearly what he described. But as time went on, I began to see the monster in my eyes. I couldn't escape the debt of so much human life taken, no matter how justified. And I went back to Carlyle and Esme. They welcomed me back like the prodigal. We'd come to a stop in front of the last door in the hall. My room, he informed me, opening it and pulling me through. The western wall was completely covered with a shelf after shelf of CDs. His room was better stocked than a music store. In the corner was a sophisticated-looking sound system, the kind I was afraid to touch because I'd be sure to break something. There was no bed, only a wide and inviting black leather sofa. He picked up a remote and turned the stereo on. It was quiet, but the soft jazz note... Gross. Soft jazz number sounded like the band was in the room with us. I went to look at his mind-boggling music collection. I turned, and he was looking at me with a peculiar expression in his eyes. What? I was prepared to feel relieved, having you know about everything, not needing to keep secrets from you. But I didn't expect to feel more than that. I like it. It makes me happy. He shrugged, smiling slightly. I'm glad, I said, smiling back. I'd worried that he might regret telling me these things. It was good to know that wasn't the case. I hate to burst your bubble, but you're really not as scary as you think you are. I don't find you scary at all, actually, I lied casually. He stopped, raising his eyebrows in blatant disbelief. Then he flashed a wide, wicked smile. You really shouldn't have said that, he chuckled. His body shifted suddenly, half crouched, tense like a lion about to pounce. I backed away from him, glaring. You wouldn't. I didn't see him leap at me. It was much too fast. I only found myself suddenly airborne, and then we crashed onto the sofa, knocking it into the wall. All the while, his arms formed an iron cage of protection around me. I was barely jostled, but I was still gasping as I tried to right myself. He wasn't having that. He curled me into a ball against his chest, holding me more securely than iron chains. I glared at him in alarm, but he seemed well in control. You were saying, he growled playfully. That you were a very, very terrifying monster, I said, my sarcasm marred a bit by my breathless voice. Much better, he approved. I struggled. Can I get up now? He just laughed. Can we come in? A soft voice sounded from the hall. I struggled to free myself, but Edward merely readjusted me so that I was somewhat more conventionally seated on his lap.
Well, like, it sounds wildly uncomfortable to be.
I pictured him holding her like a football. Yeah, like that. Like, whoop.
Like, I'm picturing, like, full fetal position. He's just like, my precious.
I could see it was Alice, then, and Jasper behind her in the doorway. My cheeks burned, but Edward seemed at ease. Go ahead, Edward was still chuckling quietly. Alice seemed to find nothing unusual in our embrace. She walked, almost danced, her movements were so graceful, to the center of the room. Jasper, however, paused at the door, his expression a trifle shocked. It sounded like you were having Bella for lunch, and we came to see if you would share, Alice announced. I stiffened for an instant, until I realized Edward was grinning. Whether I'd comment or my response, I couldn't tell. All right, Alice.
Alice, she's just, like, having fun with them.
She's the most chill. She's
like, I love love, I don't care. Love is love is love is love.
Sorry, I don't believe I have enough to spare, he replied, his arms holding me recklessly close. Actually, Jasper said, smiling despite himself as he walked into the room, Alice says there's going to be a real storm tonight, and Emmett wants to play ball. Are you game? The words were all common enough, but the context confused me. I gathered that Alice was a bit more reliable than the weatherman, though. Edward's eyes lit up, but he hesitated. Do you want to go? Edward asked me, excited, his expression vivid. Sure, I couldn't disappoint his face. Where are we going? We have to wait for Thunder to play ball. You'll see why, he promised. Will I need an umbrella? They all three laughed aloud. Will she? Jasper asked Alice. No, she was positive. The storm will hit over town. It should be dry enough in the clearing. Good then. The enthusiasm in Jasper's voice was catching, naturally. I found myself eager rather than scared stiff. Let's go see if Carlo will come. Alice bounded up into the door in a fashion that would break any ballerina's heart. Like you don't know, Jasper teased, and they were swiftly on their way. Jasper managed to inconspicuously close the door behind them. Didn't he just close the door like a normal person? Just like, what will we be playing? I demanded. You will be watching, Edward clarified. We will be playing baseball. I rolled my eyes. Vampires like baseball? It's the American pastime, he said with a mock solemnity. End of chapter.